Many people, well, maybe not real people, but commentators on the many podcasts to which I listen, have said the budget, could have been worse. I guess that depends where you are and where in the land between hard-working families and broad-shouldered capitalists you sit or stand. It could be worse made me think of John Cleese as Monty Python's Black Knight, kids, etc., lying limbless on the grass and yelling, "It's only a flesh wound." Some people's "it could have been worse" would be "it could be better." She was always going to be accused of breaking election pledges, whatever she did, so she could have just stuck a couple of pence on basic rate income tax and be done with it and all the twiddling around. Which, believe me, will happen before their 5 years. That's all we've got, in the words of David Bowie. Their 5 years in office is up. So, the bits that will affect the advice we give and some of the advice we've already given. Inheritance tax on pensions, that's a big one. Okay, there could have been worse with pensions is that tax-free cash is still there. So is tax relief on contributions on the way in. And the lifetime allowance hasn't come back, as Keir Starmer famously pledged it would. But the plan is that from 2027, personal, or in our jargon, defined contribution pensions will be part of your estate, and the pension companies will have to calculate and pay from your fund any tax that's due. That will be an administrative nightmare, believe me. It's out for consultation for 3 years because I'm guessing they didn't have the time to think it through. I personally doubt that it will happen in this Parliament, but I guess we'll have to assume that it will and plan accordingly. And for the many who've asked, defined benefit, that's final salary pensions, where you're already getting your income, or annuity income, where you've converted your pension into an income, won't be affected. The other inheritance tax change is to the relief that business and agricultural assets get, for which read shares in unquoted companies, not quoted on the stock exchange, and farms. Now, I do think that they may have underestimated the noise that farmers can, will, and are making, if you've listened to any phone-ins this week, about this, and perhaps they thought that they won't get much sympathy when they say that £1 million, the value of land and farm buildings and tractors and the rest that they can pass on, is nowhere near enough for the average family farm. So let's see how that one plays out. What directly affects us and some of our clients is business property relief, which for unquoted companies mean that you can pass on £1 million, but after that you'll get taxed at 20%. Now, for many years there have been investment companies which have themselves set up small unlisted companies specifically for investors who want to avoid inheritance tax. These often invest in supposedly safe assets, things like solar farms and renewable energy, certain types of property and so on. Now, portfolios of shares in AIM companies, the alternative investment market, the layer just below the main stock exchange, also used to qualify. However, these are now taxable at 20% for inheritance tax purposes straight away without the extra £1 million. Now, I have to admit that they were always my go-to for inheritance tax planning, as I've always thought that if the taxman wanted to question any of these schemes, he would have a go at companies specifically set up to effectively avoid tax and attract richer people to invest and reduce their inheritance tax. It could be that I might still be right, and that a secondary line of attack might be to claim that these are actually there for tax dodging. But although AIM shares are still effective, they won't be as effective as these manufactured companies for now. The other investments which have kept their exemption from inheritance tax are EISs, enterprise investment schemes, and VCTs, venture capital trusts, which we don't recommend, as in my experience, getting your money out is often nigh on impossible, as these are the highest of high-risk startup investments, and a lot of them go bust, of course. They have their place, but not for most of our clients, I have to say. Now, more on all this and the probable return of life insurance for inheritance tax planning, which was the go-to for many years, more of that to come in future editions. Anyway, capital gains tax is the other, could have been worse. Could have been worse because the damage to this and other investment taxes, on dividends for instance, had actually already been done by the Tories in the last government. They slashed the allowances. The capital gains tax allowance is now just £3,000 each year, and dividend tax allowance just £500. So a rise in the capital gains tax rates was just banging a little harder on this particular coffin nail. All we can say there is that if you have investments that aren't in ISAs, and ISAs weren't actually touched, those investments do well, you'll have some tax to pay. So it could have been worse.